we have Dawn here, Dawn Haight. And I'm trying to remember who told me about Dawn. Could have been Greg, could have been Hillary, could have been the Woodwards. So anyway, they told me about a lot of great things. Anyway, so, and some of you know Dawn, but for those of you who don't, she has lived in Southampton for the last 13 years. She moved here right out of graduate school to come to take a job for the Titanic Land Trust. And when she's a Canadian citizen, she grew up in British Columbia, which is on the west coast, in a small town called Kitchener, which she tells me was built by Alcan, the aluminum company. It was built in the 1950s, so it's a really new town, and the oldest building might be 125 years old. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, well, it's a new town, but she's happy to be here. The Titanic Land Trust offers a sabbatical program, and when her turn came to be able to take advantage of this, she chose Scotland, both because her maternal grandmother was born there, and she was interested in the history of Scotland. So she spent an interesting summer there, and she's here to tell us about it. Please welcome Dawn Haight.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. I'm very excited to be here. I had a wonderful trip to Scotland. It's good to see so many familiar faces out there. Is this loud enough? Can you all hear me? Alright, so I'm going to go through fairly quickly through these slides. If you want to see after I talk, there's actually a book up here that's white on the piano, and I had a book of my favorite pictures made, so you can flip through that if I've gone too fast and you wanted to look at something. I got a lot of slides and some material to cover here, so we're going to go fairly quickly. So, when I went to Scotland, I planned this entire sabbatical by myself. I've never been to Scotland before, I'd never actually been overseas before. This was my first trip, and so what I decided to do was, because I work for the Titanic Land Trust, I wanted to do something over there that was meaningful for the Land Trust, but also meaningful for me. So I decided to volunteer for the National Trust for Scotland. That's a land trust-like organization over there. So I picked 3 locations that the National Trust had epic properties in, and I went to those 3. And then I also spent a little bit of time in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and then moved around a little bit while I was there. I shipped my bike with me because I had to get around somehow, you know, and I was on a budget, and this, it seems to me, you know, it was a slow way of moving around that I'd be able to really see the scenery as opposed to just going by train or car or whatever, and yet it was going to give me much more distance than just walking. So actually really easy to ship your bike on the airplane. It was not that big of a deal. You just packaged it up in that box and it arrived. I had a couple of incidences with my bike while I was over there, including the very first day. The thing that held the wheel on came off, and thank God I had duct tape with me, so I had to traveling with duct tape. I had to ride about 10 miles with my bike duct taped together. That was pretty epic. And this is kind of how I traveled most of the time whenever I was riding. I had about 75 pounds of gear. That backpack weighed an absolute ton, thanks Scott and Jamie for the lift. And then I had, you know, these panniers on the back of my bike, and then as I accumulated more and more stuff, case in point, I just like started strapping stuff taller and taller onto the back of the bike with these heavy-duty straps. So, but I rode a lot. The first place I was at was the southwest of Scotland. This is a little area called, the town I was in was called Castle Douglas, although there was no actual castle in that town. Weird that they would call it Castle Douglas. But wonderful little area. This is a part of Scotland that, because it was so near the border with England, was sacked so many times during history that there aren't an awful lot of old structures left there. They all just got taken out. So I didn't see an awful lot of castles, but the scenery was epic. So like I said, my first day there, I had a 24-mile bike ride, which, by the way, I had a lot of bikes. Like, I'm not a biking person around town or anything like that, so this was like totally crazy and new, and some of my people were like, seriously, if it's too much, just stay, and I'll do it the next day, but I did it. So I got off the plane after like a red-eye flight, and then got on my bike and rode 24 miles, and I swear to God, it was uphill and raining. But it was so beautiful. So it was like, you know, looking around at this scenery while I was going, really made it like, every little hill I would go over was just like, whoa, I mean, it was fantastic, and the whole country was like that. I had never before been able to like ride around and look over to my left and see like a castle. And this tower, which is called the Tower of Balnavy, was just, you know, there at the side of the road in Cowfield. I mean, it was just surreal and wonderful. You'll see on some of the pictures, like the one at the back there, there's a little bit of a blur at the edge, and it's because I had a zoom lens from my iPhone, which is what I took all these pictures on. So sometimes you'll see the fuzz at the edge if I zoomed in, but that's that. So the first estate I worked at was called Threve. It was about a 250-acre estate that the National Trust owned. I lived about 8 miles away, so I'd ride my bike to work every day and then ride home at the end of the day. And what I did here mostly was just gardening. I mean, they had a 63-acre garden there. It was unbelievable. This was the manor house. It was built in the late 1800s by a gentleman, fellow who had made a lot of money doing things that people do. And so he bought this 1,500 acres in this area as a hunting reserve and built this house in the late 1800s. Beautiful house. It's now obviously owned by the National Trust for Scotland, and they have a school for gardening there at the property. And so there's 6 students that go there and they live in this house and then work on a 64 or 63-acre garden for a couple of years until they sort of graduate. They learn all aspects of gardening, and it's pretty neat as a program. So that's what I did, is I worked with the gardeners. Huge walled garden, the greenhouse there. Those are all cold frames along the way. These cool things down here are actually rhubarb towers. They put them over top of the rhubarb so that the rhubarb has to stretch really tall to get to the sunlight, and it makes really long rhubarb. So that, yeah, a lot of weeding around cabbage. They don't have an awful lot of vegetables in Scotland, turns out, because they don't have a very long growing season. And so it was like the vegetables that they did have were cold weather vegetables, and they grew all season. And so it was like a lot of cabbage and a lot of carrots and root vegetables and stuff like that. And I guess, you know, I was just so surprised there wasn't like greenhouses and things like that. So the vegetable selection compared to what we have was minimal, to say the best, or to say the least. That's me on the right. I'm holding a bat box that I built. There was a group that came in while I was at the Threve estate that did a, volunteers as well, that did a bat monitoring program for the National Trust. This estate has about 50 buildings on it, and all types of bats are protected in Scotland, and so they would monitor to see where the bats were living and this and that. So I worked with them for a little while, which was pretty cool because not only did I get to like meet the people and hang out with them and work with them, but I got to go traveling with them one day. So they went around in a van, and so we got to see some of the other properties in the area, which I'll show you in a second. These are just some shots of the gardens there at Threve. I mean, it was, like I said, 63 acres, and it all looked like this. I mean, it was just unbelievable. At lunchtime, I would just like wander off to new spots of the property to sit and have my food. Met all sorts of tiny birds. There's a really tiny frog. I found a little tiny salamander as big as that frog too. It was so cute. So this castle is the castle that's on that estate. And this is an interesting one because it's, like I say, it's one of the few remaining castles in that area that is still standing at all. But it's also really exemplary of the kind of architecture that was in Scotland. It's a tower house. And so it was literally a very tall tower, and this is the way all of the old buildings were built there. If you had money, you built a tower house. And so there'd be a kitchen on the ground floor. The second floor would be like the main hall with a big fireplace, and then there would be bedrooms in the succeeding floors. And so if you were not sacked and were able to maintain the tower house over the years, what they would do is just add on. So most of the older castles, you can either still see the tower house somewhere in the architecture, or it's just been eaten up by the castle itself. So these battlements were added later, but the actual tower house was just a tall tower with a roof on it. So that's another shot of it. It was stunning. Obviously a ruin. This one was built by the Black Earls of Douglas in the late 14th century. They were sacked in 1455, and it's been in disrepair ever since. The area was inhabited from the 6th century onwards. So there you go. This is the inside of this is the inside of that particular castle. And so you can see there were fireplaces in every single room. and so there were chimneys everywhere, and they were all kind of staggered around, so you could see where the floors used to be, and then where the fireplaces were, and figure out how the rooms were divided that way. It was pretty neat. And the fireplaces were huge, huge. Now, one of the other things I learned about castles is that, when I went there, I really didn't know that much, and so I sort of thought a castle was going to be a building, but it turns out like castles are like small towns. So there would be the main fortified tower house, and then there'd be all these other buildings around. There was like a blacksmith and a food storage and alcohol storage and artillery storage, and then all of the little tiny houses and huts that went along with those things for the employees. And so from the top of inside Three Castle, you could see the outline of where the buildings used to be, like see the square in the middle of the grass there. And so you could kind of start to get a feeling for like the small city that used to be. And that's what a castle is the castle and its keep and its the little building. So I thought that was pretty cool. This was another one that I saw. I actually rode my bike to this one. It's called McClellan's Castle. It was about 10 miles from where I lived in a town called Coombrey, and it was built in the late 16th century. I also learned that one of the reasons that there's so many ruins in Scotland was because in about the 1800s, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the wealthy wanted to get the people off their land so that they could put sheep on there. Sheep cost less money, they made them more money, they could get the yarn and all that kind of stuff and sell it for cloth, and the people just cost money. I mean, they had to support them, they had to give them jobs, had to maintain their buildings and stuff like that. So they call it the Highland, what did you say? Yeah, exactly, the Highland cleanses. And so it was like they shipped people either into little communities where they forced them to fish, or they shipped them overseas. And so that's how Canada was settled by so many Scots, was because that's where they all left. So one of the other ways that they got rid of people was by putting in this roof tax. And so you would have to pay for every peak of a roof that you had. And so in a castle like this one, where they owned another castle up the road, they were kind of like, just take the roof off, then we don't have to pay the tax. And so a lot of castles went into ruin in the mid-1800s because of the roof tax, which was geared towards getting people off the land, but it hit the wealthy as well, and so they would just take the roof off. And so a lot of castles went into disrepair around that time. So there's another example. This is actually called Sweetheart Abbey. It was founded in 1275, just up the road from the other two, by a young woman in memory of her husband who had passed away. So he predeceased her. She had his heart embalmed and took it to this place and built an abbey. And then when she died, the monks buried her with her husband's embalmed heart and then renamed the abbey Sweetheart Abbey because they thought it was just such a sweet story. So beautiful, beautiful building. The arches and stuff like that. I mean, this was from the 12th century, and it's just still epically preserved, considering the roof is gone and it's really neat. Just some other stuff I saw around. Being a Canadian, the White family always teases me about the curling in Canada, because I remember the first time we saw it on the Olympics, and Tom White was like, "What is happening with this sport?" And so anyway, there was epic curling rinks all over the country there. And just some other gardens and churches. This was an interesting thing. So you can barely see what I'm trying to take a picture of here, but if you squint your eyes along the coastline there, you can see all these kind of hazy structures. That's a wind farm. There are over 5,200 wind turbines in Scotland, and I took this picture and put it up here because it's just funny to me. I mean, you hear about people complaining, "Oh, you don't want that here, they're so unattractive, and they're going to ruin our view." This is not ruin my view. I thought it was perfectly fine. In fact, I thought it was pretty cool to look across and see them. And the Scots embrace wind farming as a people. They think it's excellent. And they're everywhere. There'll be a castle with a wind turbine right next door, and nobody had a problem with it. So after I left Castle Douglas, I went up into Aberdeenshire, and I was at two different places here. One of them I just took a week off to chill after my month working in Threave. And then I volunteered at a second estate for a week in the same neck of the woods. So it's a different countryside up there. It was much more rolling hills. They were steeper but longer. And at first when I got there, I was like, "Oh, this is great, it's so much flatter." No, it wasn't flatter at all. It was just longer to get up the hill and longer to get down. They had a lot more old history in this part of Scotland. Like I say, it wasn't the same stacking as there was in the south. So there's a lot more of these types of things that remain. This is an underground earth house. It wasn't actually lived in by anybody, but they used it as food storage. And so it was basically like a root cellar. And it was pretty cool. It's just at the side of the road there, so I stopped my bike, I got off, and went in, and that was the entrance. And then this was me from the inside, and I was trying to get like a picture, and I'm backing up into this thing. It was really, really hard to get a shot, but man, I'll tell you, it was dark. It was like, even with my flashlight, I was like, oh, it's really creepy. And so it kind of goes around as a circle like this, and you get into the pit of it, it's just blackness. But, you know, still kicking around, this was built in 200. Wow. Just unbelievable. So, they also have a lot of stone circles in Scotland. Similar to Stonehenge in their general layout, some of them, but they're unique in a specific way. Now, you can see at the side here, there's this long, flat stone, and then the two tall stones. That's what makes a Scottish stone circle sort of more unique to Scotland, is the fact that they've got this one recumbent stone. And they're typically lined up so that over the top of that part of the circle is where the summer or the winter solstice sets. And so it's sort of, they all seem to have that particular recumbent stone with flankers, and that's the winter solstice. So, I mean, obviously we have no idea what these really represented and what they did. They've done some excavation of some of them, but not a tremendous amount. And a lot of them have been destroyed by farmers and stuff like that over the years. So there'll be like a couple stones that you're thinking might be a stone circle, but they're not really sure. But there are a few dozen that remain as preserved as this one. And generally on hilltops, almost always with the solstice lined up. They were pretty cool. Just the topography, I mean, it was like, this was in the same area as that last shot. I mean, it was like these mossy hills were like this big, just cushy, mossy hills. It was like you wanted to just snuggle in and like lie down there. It was so neat. Like a fairyland, you know, you really got the idea that it was like, this was where fairies lived, and because it was just so magical. I mean, it was so beautiful. Okay, so there was a few special cows in Scotland. This was one of them on the Oreo fellow there. It's called a belted Galloway, and so when I was at Free, the first estate I was at, the guy was telling me, "Oh, have you seen any of the belted Galloways yet?" And I was like, "No, what are those?" And he was like, "Oh, you know, this cow with a white stripe in their middle," and I was like, "Yeah, right." I didn't say anything to him, but I walked away, and I'm like, "That's Scott, of course." Like, he's trying to make me believe there's some weird cow with a belt in the middle. Come on. And then I saw them, and I was like, "Oh my god, there's really cows like that." Okay. So they're unique to Scotland because they're a Scottish breed, but they're very hardy cows. They can handle the extended periods of cold, the climate, the terrain, and better than other cows. And let me tell you, they are tasty cows. Oh yeah. So I mean, there's a ton of animal farming in Scotland still. Sheep are everywhere, and cows are everywhere. Angus beef and everything in wool. Now the sheep are much harder to get pictures of, you know, it was crazy. I would go up to the sheep and be like, try and get their shot. This was like one of the only pictures I got at all with sheep in it, because they would just run. I mean, you would get near the fence and they would absolutely book away. And the cows, on the other hand, would come like running towards me all the time. It was like, they were like, hey! And I'd ride my bike along and they would run along with me. It was so funny. However, a funny story about cows. So I thought, oh, they're so cute, look at how adorable they are. They're friendly, big-eyed, brown-eyed cows. Yeah. One day I decided to cut through a cow field because it was going to be a quicker way home, and it was raining and I was tired. And so I get 2/3 of the way through this field and I hear this angry sounding boom. And I look over and there's this big cow standing probably from like me to the door away. And it's stomping its foot. And behind it, like V-shaped, are a whole bunch of other cows. And I'm just like, what's going on here, guys? And I had my bike and I'm like, yeah, okay. And I kept moving. A few minutes later I look over and they're like closer. And I was like, oh, the cows are upset. And so I got out of there pretty quickly, but it was scary. And so I got out and I went to work the next day and I said to the people, this has happened. And they were like, yeah, idiot. People get trampled by cows like every year. And I was like, really? So, turns out, yeah. So that was eye-opening. And after that, I was just like, cows. This is me holding a baby sheep. I stayed at this farm for a week, as I say, and they were a sheep farm. They had the Belted Galloways, and they also had the sheep. And so the cows they raised for food, and the sheep they raised for the wool. And a really neat group of people, really fun. And this was a brand new baby sheep that I got to hold for a few minutes. So in that same area, I actually rode my bike down into this little tiny village looking for groceries, actually, one day. The village did not have a grocery store, turns out. I got there and was disappointed. So I'm kind of dejected, riding around and no food. And I stopped outside the one shop I found in town. And it was a kilt making store. And I was just looking in the window, kind of. And this woman comes around the corner and she's like, I was like, oh. And she comes over to the door and she's like, come inside. And I was like, what about my bike? And she's like, seriously? I was like, so I went inside and she took me on a full tour of her kilt factory. She made the kilts for all of the layers in the area. To this day, the people who still own, the vast majority of the big houses and castles in Scotland are still privately owned and lived in. Their staff get a new kilt every year and then a new set of like knickers, which is sort of a short pant they use for hunting, and a special kind of jacket with a unique collar. And so she makes all of them for 22 of the big estates in that area, and it was just, I mean, she was a really cool woman. Showed me how to make the kilt from start to finish. They're hand sewn. It's a special kind of weave that they get that's made to length and everything. Each of the individual like owners of the castles, I mean, while they sort of go by tartan a little bit, they're all unique. Like the tartan will be slightly different for this house than that house, even though they're the same colors of tartan, whatever. I mean, really interesting. And she actually sent me home with a couple of scraps of fabric of Buchanan tartan, which was my family. So that was pretty cool. This was a castle called Craigie Bar. Construction here began about 1600 and it was occupied until the late 1960s. The last couple of women that lived there were sisters, and I mean the stairs and stuff like that. I got to tour this castle and it was really neat on the inside. There was no electricity when they moved out, so it was still all gas oil lamps and everything. It was really, really amazing. You weren't allowed to take pictures inside any of the buildings, although I tried several times and never was caught. So I have no pictures of inside of anything, but I did get to tour this one. It's still fully furnished as it was when the ladies left it to them from the 60s, and the antiques are from, from way, way back. And it was really, really nice. And again, it's like you're riding down the road and you look over and here's this castle. Just a shot. I mean, like, I told several people, I mean, it rained almost every day that I was there. There would be a couple of days blue sky the whole day, but the vast majority of the time it rained. But it was like, you can't even complain when the rain looks like this.
Yeah.
It was just like, it was stunning all the time. Here's another castle. This was privately owned. I didn't get to go in this one. I just saw it on a bike ride riding past, and pictures. There's a lot of those. So this was some of the kind of work I did. When I was working for the second estate, we were doing a lot of path building. And it was hard work. Ripping up the grass, and then we'd lay down this underlay and lay down wheelbarrows of stuff. But all of these people were volunteers. I mean, so they do these volunteer holidays where you can go and volunteer for a week and just work doing whatever the estate needs you to do. And these people are gung-ho. I mean, they would get really upset when it wasn't like hard work. And it was cool. I'm like, look at them. These aren't spectacular, muscular men. These are women who volunteer to go and do this for a week. It was just the attitude of volunteerism was totally different there. Really cool. All right, so this is Castle Fraser. That's where I spent my second work time in Scotland. We worked here and around the estate at this castle for a week with those same women. This was a really cool place. The current castle was built in the 1500s around original tower house. So you can kind of see the back half of this is the original tower house. Obviously, it's a bigger tower house than the last one, and then they just added on the rest of the structure as time went on. Stunning estate. This was just another big house up the road. I mean, it was like I could not get enough of the architecture, and like I loved this, and it never got old for me. Every time I would walk around, I was just like taking these pictures of these buildings that were just so old and really interesting. So they were everywhere. All right, so this is from Castle Fraser, looking down at the walled garden. Most of the big houses there have walled gardens. They've typically got, or they typically had a greenhouse in them that was heated, and so they could grow things like lemon trees and grapes and organic or specialty foods like tomatoes, basil, stuff like that. They would grow in the greenhouse. And then the rest of the garden was either, some of them were just strictly for vegetables, but some of the bigger estates had a second walled garden that was for ornamentals. This one only had the one. It's now been converted into a ornamental garden strictly, but they're stunning, absolutely stunning. This was another castle. This one is Crafus. You can see the tower house on the right there. It's really clear standing in the middle of the picture. And then the castle that got built around it. Crafus was built in 1553, and between this one and the next castle, Drum Castle, these were some of the best gardens I saw in Scotland. The yews at these places were planted 300 years ago. I mean, the yew trees that are there, I mean, just unbelievably well maintained and well preserved. This is another shot of the same one. And I can't even tell you. That's the same garden on the left as the first one, and then these are the gardens of Drum on the right. You know, that's why they had the walled gardens. The vegetables went inside walls because of deer and bunnies. There are so many bunnies everywhere. But deer are a problem, not the same as we have here, obviously. So this was Drum Castle. The gardens were just spectacular, absolutely spectacular. And it did not hurt that it was one of the few blue sky days I had while I was there. So, and I mean, look at them, they're empty. There's like nobody there. I found that a lot while I was in Scotland, touring around these places that were epic, and it was just me. So, unbelievable. Another stone circle with the recumbent stone in the middle. It was really hard to get a picture of these because when you're in it, you're like, okay, trying to skew your camera, and then when you're outside of it, they almost disappeared into the landscape, so they were hard to get shots of, but you get the idea. And that one was located from the shot on the right, sort of looking over this, down this hill. Okay, so then I went to Edinburgh. I was in Edinburgh for 2 weeks. I stayed actually on the right is a shot of the college campus there of the University of Edinburgh, and I stayed in those buildings at the back, right in the university campus. It was kind of neat. I never stayed on campus when I was going to school, so it was just like, well, this is what it's like living in the building. Edinburgh is a really interesting city. It's built really far down. They just kept building on top of the city. And so it's like these buildings would go, 4 or 5 stories like underneath the ground. And there would just be steps going down and down and down. Lots of them still had windows on the fronts and everything like that. Like it wasn't like they were dark. They were just low. And it's a city that's built like on ridges. And so there'd be a high building put on the ridge, and then they would build bridges going across and just build straight down underneath the bridge. So really interesting city. I toured a lot of Edinburgh. I just kept going out every day, just going around and around. So the tower on the left at the back, the tall one, these other 2 pictures were taken from that tower. Okay, this was one of the best castles I saw in Scotland. It's called, I don't know it down, this one was called Craigmillar Castle. And it was the best because it was so big and so well preserved, and I was literally the only person there. I was there for like 4 hours, and I didn't even see anybody else. It was just me walking through this epic place by myself. And I got lost. Like I would be in the castle trying to figure out how to get from here to that room up there, and just completely, I'd come out and like see these corridors like this, and I'm like, oh, left or right? And it was just, you'd go one way, and I'd come out in these rooms and be like, look out the windows to try and figure out where I was. It was so much fun. I mean, to get lost in these places and never see anybody. I mean, like I could literally, for hours, just wandering in this castle, just be whatever. And then all the floors here were still intact, so you could literally get up and down all of the floors because they were stone, most of them, which is unusual. Most of them were wood, but really big castle. Mary Queen of Scots stayed here. I mean, just more of it. It was like, it was crazy. You'd be like, I want to get to that room. It would take you half an hour to get there. Really neat. All right, so this is Holyrood Palace, which is the Queen's residence in Scotland. A few different angles of it. I did take the tour of the palace again. You couldn't take pictures from inside, so no shots of that. But it was built attached to an abbey. That's the bottom left shot there. And the abbey had been built on a former grounds of a church, which is their sort of ruins that you see in front of it. So it's like just add-on after add-on after add-on, which is just how they roll. I mean, they just kind of continue tacking stuff on, and it's all stone, so it never really, you know, I mean, the ruins in the front eventually fell down, but those were built in like 200, and then the Abbey was built in, I can't even remember, like 800 or something like that, and then Holyrood Palace was just added on to that. So it was really neat the way they sort of just took stuff in, and it never got knocked down or removed or anything. Really big, neat house. This is the other, this is Edinburgh Palace, or Edinburgh Castle, I'm sorry, which was on, so Holyrood Palace was built at the bottom of this street, and then you walk up High Street, and the Edinburgh Castle was built at the top. And in fact, the castle was a fortification that had been built there for hundreds of years. And then the king, at some point, decided he wanted a more rural palace, so he like went a mile up the road and built Holyrood Palace, and so that road there became known as the Royal Mile in between the two of them. So this became sort of the seat of business affairs and whatever, and then the palace became the residence. So there's this epic park in the middle of Edinburgh that I stayed right near called Arthur's Seat, and it's this crazy hill. They call it Arthur's Seat. Some people speculate that that's because King Arthur spent time there. There are a lot of historic fortified ruins. They found some very interesting archaeological remains on Arthur's Seat. But today, it is just basically a craggy rock in the middle of the city with paths all the way through it. There's a couple of ruins here and there, but the majority of it is just a park. And so you get to walk around it and walk all over it. And I'll tell you, it is really steep. You're looking at the right there of the people walking up the trail, and then that's me on that trail at the top. And I swear to God, I was like, I didn't even know I was afraid of heights, but I would like walk along the edge of the mountain, and I'm like, I am not going over to that side. I don't know who's coming. You people are moving. I am not. Because it was just so sheer down. It was crazy. And I was thinking to myself, this would never fly anywhere.
Right.
So this is actually one of the former fortified castle remains that is in, but you can't even see a thing. Like I walked up on that crag, there was nothing to be seen, but apparently they discovered archaeological remains in this area. A lake that was constructed by one of the kings of Scotland many years ago to beautify the park. I mean, so like hundreds of years ago they were building lakes to beautify parks. A remains of one of the chapels in that park. And then these are just a couple like houses, again, more castles. I didn't get into these ones, but just sort of castles you'd see around. I did go into the underground of Edinburgh for a tour, like, you know, one of those spooky underground tours that you'd pay for, and it was kind of silly, but nonetheless, it was neat to go in the underground. People actually lived in these places. They were windowless, deep under the city. And they found remnants of entire families, poor families that had to live down in there for, I don't know, 30 or 40 years of the time period. Pretty wild. All right, so then from Edinburgh, I went up to Montrose, and this is where I spent the last month, so I was in Montrose for the month of August. It's on the coast, just south of Aberdeen. This was the oldest place I spent quality time. The estate there was like really old. The other ones were oldish, but this one was epic. This was the kind of thing that I like. This was my morning walk to work through that gate and then down this path, and it was just like overgrown gardens and unbelievable waterfalls, these bridges. Like literally, this was my walk to work across that bridge, past that waterfall. It was really cool. The walls there, you can tell that this is an older estate because of the walls. They've been rebuilt and added onto. That's a chimney in the wall on the left. That they would actually have fires built in the wall so that it would heat up the brick wall, and then the greenhouse would be on the other side of it to grow the fancy vegetables and fruit. This actual walled garden is completely in a state of ruin now. They don't even, the National Trust doesn't do anything inside of it. It's just a ruined walled garden. There's nothing there. On the left there, on the right there is the former entrance to the original castle that had been on the site, but that's all that remains is this arched tower with a statue on the top of it that's actually like of a person riding a mermaid. And that's all that remains from the original castle. Going around the wall, though, you can see like where these structures used to be, where there were houses that were built into it and attached to it and stuff like that. And it's really neat to sort of see what was there, but you can't figure out. I mean, they've done a lot of archaeological research, and it's just kind of, they're just not sure. This was the actual grand house at Montrose where I was working. This was called the House of Dun, D-U-N. Dun in ancient Scottish means castle. And so there's a lot of that word appears a lot. And again, because this was such a historic area, they just called it Dun because it was the castle in the region. But again, the castle, they don't even know where they can't even figure out where it actually was. This place was a Georgian manor that was built in, it was, I want to say like 1850s or 1830s. Perfectly symmetrical. Unbelievable, like 28 rooms on the inside, really, really lovely estate. It's a massive estate. They still own hundreds of acres that goes right across the water to the water and everything. They have freaking cows walking in the there. Okay, so there was a chapel on the site that was close to the public, but I asked one day, I was like, do you guys have keys? And they were like, yeah, you want a tour? I said, sure. So I got to go in this chapel, and it had been converted to a mausoleum for this woman here and her husband. So these people, it was a Marquis and his wife, Archibald Kennedy, Marquis of Ailsa, and Earl of Collasus, and his wife, Margaret Erskine, were buried there. They were buried 185 years ago, but when you walked into the crypt, you could still see the crown, the burial crowns on their caskets. I mean, it was unbelievably cool. Those caskets are lead. They had been wrapped in leather with tacks. Just really, really neat. There's one of the burial crowns. So this was the work I was doing there. Weeding paths. I mean, it was like overgrown. Now you can walk. This was the view that I had from most of wherever I worked, looking across the water from the estate. Just stunning. Walking around. That was the house on the left is where I stayed while I was there. And the walled garden. Just a random bridge. I mean, it was like everything there was so well done. Nothing was simple. This was a privately owned estate that I took a tour of. They just opened their doors for a couple of weeks a year, and it just happened to be that the couple of weeks I was in the area, they were open, and so I went on a tour. The young girl was probably 18 who gave me the tour, and she lives there, and it's like, whatever, mom and dad, and blah, 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 and grabbing off the wall, and it was just so nonchalant about this crazy castle she lives in and has grown up in, and the family history. I mean, they really are pretty nonchalant about it. They think, Scotland, we don't have that history. They like to go to like Rome, where there's history, and I'm like, really, I came here. This was their garden. Unbelievably beautiful, and it's like on the picture on the right there, you can see the nails in the wall, and it was just like centuries of them tacking nails in the wall to tie the roses up and stuff like that. It was really neat. More shots of their garden. The greenhouse there was just unbelievable. Instead of having like all the windows permanently attached, they would slide them in and out every year. These little, it was like rails, and you could just slide the glass in, and then in the fall you would just take it out so that it didn't get damaged during storms and stuff. Just ingenious. Again, just another private castle. I walked by one day. It was like, over there. Alright, so I took this picture. This was an epic bike ride. I took a few of these epic bike rides while I was there, and found myself like in the strangest places, just sort of really just riding around. I have a couple of maps with me, and I had my phone, and so it was like, I could figure out where I was going roughly, but I just kind of like went with it. I figured I could do like 30 to 40 miles in a day without killing myself, and so I did it a few times. So I ended up riding along this trail and like looking down to the water, and I was like, what? Get on flat land. But it was really neat. I saw this castle while I was there. This is called Red Castle, and it's a really old castle. A lot of it was built by a king in Scotland a bazillion years ago, and in the late 12th century, and inhabited by kings and really high up nobles for about 400 years before it fell into ruin. This is a picture of their view from the castle. Okay, this was another one of the best ones I was at. This is called Dunotar Castle, the name with the Dun. The site has been inhabited since at least the 5th century. This was the castle that is best known for during one of a siege, they hid the Scottish crown jewels here. So this was a really well-known and easily defended castle because it was just built on this outcrop of land, and it was so steep there was no way to get up it except the one entrance, and so it was a fairly, relatively easy to defend castle. They just didn't have any options. So it's actually a very well-preserved castle. I mean, it's like a city. There's so many buildings. It's acres in size. That on the right there is just the edge of the well, which has been there for like 1,000 years. Really, really neat. Shot of that. They built that folly over there on the left just to, improve their view. All right, so in Montrose, the beach there was really cool. It was bedrock, and so the bedrock was right at the surface. And when you went out there, if the tide was out, you could walk on these like valleys, and these are like 8-10 feet deep on the left. And so you could climb down in there when the tide was fully out, and just walk around, and the tops of them would be way up here, and just climb all around. And I did that for days. I mean, whenever it was not raining or I had a day off or whatever, I would just go down and climb through the beaches, try and avoid the castle. I mean, you get an idea about how like big some of these things are from my feet there, and they're not tiny. But on the right, there's agates there everywhere, and those little sort of greenish dots in the rock are agates that are buried in the rock, and I brought home a pile of these things, and they're kind of a translucent-y stone that if you cut them, they've got a really interesting pattern on the inside. So another shot of that. On the left here, this is a tower house. This is something that's fairly unique to Scotland as well. Actually, there's more of these in Ireland. There's only 2 in Scotland, but it's unique to that general part of the world. They would build these things. There was a theory that they were built as battle stations, but later studies have shown that they were just bell towers to call the public to either mass or to community meetings and that kind of thing. It was just because they were tall and everybody could hear it. It used to be thought that the doors were built 6 feet off the ground so that it would protect jewels and this and that, but in fact, it was just because they weren't built on any foundation. They were literally just sort of pumped on the ground, and so when they put the door right at the ground level, they would destabilize the building, so they had to put the door up a little bit so that they could have a firm foundation. It was really neat though. The tower you can see on the right-hand side, on the right-hand picture, it's on the left-hand side is the top of the tower. And again, just incorporated into the church, a few hundred years later. This was an insane asylum that I stumbled across. It was an absolutely epically huge building, and it's just been abandoned since about the 80s, I think. And it was a place where they sent all sorts of, insane. They would also send like unmarried people in there, and they would send, people with debilitating diseases there. But initially, it started out as an insane asylum in Montrose, and just sitting there empty. Just another, this was an entrance to a castle that I couldn't even see from the road, but I was just like, wow, that's the entrance. This was the last castle I saw while I was in Scotland. I actually saw this the weekend before I left. This is called Edsel Castle. It was built in the early 16th century. It was really, really neat. The thing that was the coolest about this particular one was that it was the first pleasure garden that was ever built in Scotland. So they actually, in the 17th century, added this walled garden, and it was just for food, and that was it. So they had these plaques along the edge of the wall that you could walk along, and they told different stories of the virtues and things like that. And then these little built-in niches where they would plant flowers just like this. So it was pretty cool that there was like actual pleasure gardens. That's sort of a bad shot of the pleasure garden itself, which is, that's the way it would have looked in the 17th century when it was originally built. That's it. Anybody have any questions at all? Is there anything I can answer? I tried haggis because I felt like I should, and I didn't know that I could. It was very dry and grainy, and just kind of creepy. But I did try it. Mostly I ate stir-fried vegetables and I ate a lot of meat. You know, it was funny, when you went in the grocery stores, it was like the vegetable section was wee tiny. The meat section was huge. And the candy aisle was huge. So much candy. And so I avoided the candy aisle and just, yeah, I mean, I ate tons of different types of meat, you know, from lamb to, you know, they had like, as a standard behavior, there'd be chicken eggs, duck eggs, quail eggs, other eggs, in all the grocery stores. So it was like you could just get more of protein type things. So that's not a vegetarian. Yes? I did, but I didn't put them in the presentation. I met a few people that I'm still in touch with, and a lot, you know, we all became friends on Facebook and whatever, and I met one woman that we really became good friends, and we have emailed back and forth since I got home. She's a weaver on Harris, which is, you know, Harris tweed, and so I'm hoping to go back and visit her, you know, a few times. But
The one building that was in the same style,
yeah.
that was kind of interesting that they closed down in the 80s.
I think it just became, you know, it seems their medical system, you know, because I was there going up to the vote, I sort of heard a lot about the vote on both sides, and I'm personally really pleased that it went to a no vote. That was what I was hoping while I was there. But healthcare was one of the big issues at hand, and it's because of the way they've decentralized healthcare and privatized certain aspects of it that hospital closed. It was just so big, and you know, they were sending everybody from the country there, and it just didn't make sense for the country anymore to have a single place like that. And so they decentralized it, and some people were supporting that. A massive facility.
It's kind of interesting to know that there's something that large there, but I have heard that there was quite a bit of schizophrenia.
I don't know.
I have two quick questions.
Sure.
Did you eat a lot of shortbread? And you mentioned something in the beginning about the black girls or something. What was that about?
The Black Douglases. They were the very first castle that I showed was inhabited by the Black Douglases. The Black Douglases were a clan that sort of the Douglas clan that were called black because they went against the politics at the time.
Okay. Okay.
And so yeah, they were just they were put down as one of the early uprisings.
What about shortbread?
Shortbread, you know, I was trying very hard to be good and avoid the candy aisle, and so I steered pretty clear. I had some of it, but not too much.
How did the Scottish take to a Canadian? I mean, just in general, you know, like coming from another country. I mean, they probably every summer they have one volunteers coming in.
Okay, so that's interesting. You know, I thought that too, especially when I started planning Sabbatical. I was like, oh, no big deal. No, I actually had to get a working visa to go there and volunteer. In Scotland and England, in the UK in general, you cannot even volunteer there unless you're a member of the European Union or have a visa. So because my grandmother was born there, I was able to apply for and get an ancestral visa for Scotland or for the UK for it was like a 5-year visa, so I can go back for a few more years. But so no, they don't get a tremendous influx of volunteers from North America. They do get a tremendous influx from Europe. Now the other point is that it's funny. I've lived in New York now for 13 years, and I identify as a New Yorker now. So when people ask where I was from, I said New York. And I found actually in my experience while I was over there that one of the lasting effects it had was that when I came home, I decided to apply for citizenship. So here, so that's
Did you have a North accent?
no. You know, I don't even think I have a Canadian accent. I know a couple of words here and there, but no, I mean they couldn't tell my accent from anything. And I was saying earlier, the people from Glasgow, their accent was so thick that sometimes if I met people from there and they would talk and I was just like, like I had no idea what they were saying to me at all. I was completely intimidated by them because I was just like, I can't follow them at all. So their accents, I thought I was going to this English-speaking country and it was going to be so easy to get around because they all spoke English. And it's like crazy how thick the accents were. And they've got a bunch of funny words. And so they insert these words into things too. Pardon me?
B words.
B words?
Yeah.
They all start with letters.
Yeah, I don't know.
Listen,
Yeah, like puttock. a puddock is a frog. I'm like, why don't you just frog? What else? They say like dead a lot as an emphasis word, and so it was like dead deer. And the first time I heard that, I was like, I don't even know what you're saying. What? And it means very expensive. You know, so it was, you know, dead was like a very, deer. Or they'd say, you know, I can't think anymore. A whole bunch of phrases like that. It was just, it made sense once you could break it down, but when they were just rattling it off, you were like, what? So you just, you know, even spigot. I mean, they would use spigot all the time. And I was like, what the heck is a spigot? Like, why can't you just say more normal words? So, yeah, it was hard. Yep.
Did you get to one of the Scotch classics, like Glenlivet, outside of Edinburgh?
I didn't make a distillery, you know, and I really wanted to, but they were all in the Highlands. The closest one was about 40 miles from where I was in Alford, which was where I was with the baby sheep.
Yes.
And I was like, 40 miles, okay, and I tried to figure it out if I could take public transportation and whatever, but at the end of the day, it was just too hard, and I was tired by then. I had actually had a little incident when I was in Reeve, where I was riding my bike into town one day to get groceries, and I fell and wiped out badly and broke, I don't know, a few ribs. And so after that, it was kind of, it took me about a month to heal, and it was like then, you know, doing things like riding 45 miles one way. Just lost it. So I decided, yeah. So, yeah, you know, it was hard. I mean, there were things I missed because I didn't have a car, but there were things I saw because I had a bike. Yeah.
The pubs are convenient. Any pubs?
Any what?
Pubs.
Pubs, yes, I did experience a few. You know, it was my thing because I was living so rural. Most of the places I was staying, Reeve and Dunn, were very far out of town. So riding into town was a challenge. So I didn't hit an awful lot of pubs, which was fine. But I did hit a few. When I was in Edinburgh, I traveled around. I didn't enjoy Edinburgh as much as anywhere else in the country. It was my least favorite place. I found the people there the least friendly, and the pubs were awful. They didn't have ice. They wouldn't. I went to this one pub and I was like, I had traveled around to like 4 or 5 pubs by this point. They didn't let you sit at the bar. There was no bar seating, and so I was like, well, what am I going to go sit by myself at a random table? Like, I'm not going to be able to talk to anybody there or whatever. So I kept trying to find one, and finally dejected, I went up to this one and I was like, what? I'll just have a, you know, a roll on the rocks. And he says, how many? And I said, all of them. And he was like, 2? And I was like, yeah, I'll have 2. So he gives me 2 ice cubes, new ones, and this single shot of rum. And I was like, can I have a double? And he said, we don't serve doubles here. And I said, fine, I'll have 2 rums. I'll have rums. So he gives me the 2, and I poured the 2 together, and I was just like, So I didn't love Edinburgh. That was sort of my general experience there. But man, Glasgow, well, that was such a fun town, and they were so nice, and the pubs there totally rocked. So I was in Glasgow for a total of 5 days. So it was like, I loved that city. Nothing but great things to say about Glasgow. Yes.
Was there any exhibit for Robert Louis Stevenson?
No, I didn't see any Robert Louis Stevenson, although Robert Burns was their poet, the most popular poet in Scotland, was everywhere. You could see Burns' birthplace. There was a house that Burns used to live in. There was a house where a pub where Burns stopped once and had written a note and they framed it. I mean, Burns was everywhere, but no, not so much Stevenson.
Did you stay at any of those small houses on any of these streets?
Yeah, so the last place I was, which was Dunn, I stayed right on the estate. The first, that was the only place I stayed on the estate. And it was neat. I mean, the house itself was built, 300 years ago. It was one of the original farmhouses. I think it was like the blacksmith's house. And very small, like single room wide, very narrow, cold. The last month I was there, the temperature didn't get above 53 degrees for the whole freaking month. Yeah, summer in Scotland. So, which I knew, and I had the appropriate clothes, and it rained a lot, you know what I mean? So you just put your warm, I'd wear like all the pants I had and like 3 or 4 shirts and then all my outdoor gear and mittens and a toque and just, I had.
That's a hat.
And so, did you stay in like, where, the other places where you stayed, were you actually like little homes? Were you the only one there, or were you at a hostel, or?
No, I didn't do any hostels. I rented apartments. And so because I arranged the whole thing in advance, I had just looked up apartments. And so the first place I stayed was actually it was an apartment in a, where the horses had been in a stable block that had been converted into apartments. And so there was other people that lived there, but they were full-timers, and this one had just happened to be vacant, and they rented it to me for a month. And it was a furnished apartment, so I just stayed there. Like I said, I stayed at the university when I was in Edinburgh, and then Glasgow, I just rented a hotel. When I worked for Castle Fraser, which was the one sort of in the middle there, I stayed with a group of other volunteers at like a center. It was kind of like, almost like the library, you know, it was just sort of a public space that people could rent for, you know, meetings and community stuff, and there were some bunk beds and a kitchen, so I stayed there.
Where are you going next?
Italy.
Yeah.
Italy, yeah.
Tuscany?
I don't know yet. I haven't homed in, and I'm not going to do it soon. But because it was expensive, and I got to save up. But Italy, definitely. Yes.
Do they get snow in the winter?
Yeah, they do. In the Highlands, they get snow. None of the places that I was got a lot of snow. If they got some, it would like shut the city down, you know. But the Highlands, they get a lot of snow.
What about golf?
Golf, yes. Well, that's interesting. I actually took with me on a recommendation by the Whites some Shinnecock golf balls to leave as gifts for people. So I had like half a dozen or maybe 8 of them or whatever, and I did leave them as gifts. And the people that like got them loved them. They were like, wow. They thought it was really cool to have golf balls from the oldest golf course in North America, you know, at the place where golf was invented. But I didn't meet an awful lot of golfers, and I don't golf. But I did see an awful lot of the courses, and they were epic. Just, I mean, they looked like Shinnecock. So.
Well done. Thank you.